Good afternoon. My group will be doing a review of O'Brien et al.'s 2021 study titled Misplaced Trust: When Trust in Science Crosses Belief in Pseudoscience and the Benefits of Critical Evaluation. A brief summary of the article. The goal of the article was to find a correlation between a person's trust in science and the belief in pseudoscience. Pseudoscience in the article was defined as seemingly scientific but false content and labels. The method of the experiment, they conducted 4 experiments which sought to measure the belief in the article with multiple variables, such as people's willingness to spread the information, which in the article is defined as dissemination, methodological literacy, which in the article is defined as people's ability to critically analyze what they're reading, cognitive style, and their trust in science. Their hypothesis was that vulnerability to pseudoscientific content would be greater among participants with a higher trust in science. And the results was that people with a higher trust in science were more susceptible to misinformation and pseudoscientific content.
O'Brien sought to evaluate the significance of critical evaluation and trust in science our beliefs in pseudoscience. There was an increase in misinformation following the COVID-19 pandemic due to the high politicization of the health prevention measures. And as for methods and participants, as you can see, there was a total of 1,991 participants. The ages ranged anywhere from 18 years old to 99 years old. Experimenters obtained consent from the participants to undertake the surveys. The participants were then divided into 4 experiments, each with 2 experimental groups that provided identical articles. However, the control group had an article supported by scientists, and the experimental group had the same article, but the references were activists instead. Experiments 1 and 2 had an article about the COVID-19 pandemic, and experiments 3 and 4 had an article about genetically modified organisms, or GMOs for generalizability. After reading the article, the participants engaged in a reflective session. Experimenters gave surveys to see how they felt about the article, as well as they observed the willingness that the participants had to share the article, which is also known as dissemination.
Results for experiments 1 through 4 showed that participants with higher levels of trust in science that read articles with scientific content led to stronger beliefs in potential pseudoscientific information than reading articles with non-scientific content. This being the case, higher levels of trust also showed to increase potential for dissemination. Dissemination, again, being participants' willingness to spread this pseudoscientific knowledge widely with other people. Experiment 4 showed that critical evaluation led to a decrease in the potential for susceptibility to pseudoscientific content. The main hypothesis being tested, that vulnerability to pseudoscientific content would be greater among participants with higher levels of trust in science, was proven correct across all experiments. Experiment 4, more so intended as a casual test, mainly for whether or not critical evaluation can be used to decrease susceptibility. This was done by inducing a critical evaluation mindset versus a trust in science mindset in participants. It is important that people do not trust science blindly, but rather critically evaluate scientific content to be able to discern it from pseudoscientific content. People should not be swayed by scientists as a source. This knowledge should encourage the scrutinization of misinformation.
Next, we're going to go over some of the strengths of this. One of these strengths was that the article did a good job in verifying the results of their study through replication. They conducted 4 experiments with 2 trials per article. This ensured that the results of their study was consistent. Next, they performed unique statistical analyses, one of which was ANCOVA, which is a combination of the ANOVA stat method and regression analysis. And they also, instead of analyzing each individual relationship, they used a cross-validation method to perform the best models to cross-reference the data. And lastly, they varied the definition of dissemination to account for each possible situation. For example, In one experiment, dissemination was reported by asking if the researcher should include it in a class in some of the experiments, and in others, they asked if they should share it online with others.
Now we would like to go over what we felt were limitations and shortcomings of the study, as well as what we would recommend for future studies. The biggest limitation, in our opinion, was that the sample was not necessarily representative of the US population, thus the study is low in generalizability. Although the researchers collected demographic data, they did not use it. In the article, racial breakdowns for each experimental group was provided. They also surveyed the participants and found that the political ideology for each experimental group was closest to true moderate for each experimental group. And they also collected the gender breakdown, age breakdown, and socioeconomic breakdown. However, they did not use this information in any of their analysis. And this could also be due to the fact that the participants came from the Amazon and Dynata databases and not necessarily from any other database that participants could have been selected from. Another limitation is that the study depended on people's trust in science and whether it could occur without the accompaniment of scientific research, which in the study's case was the article supported by scientists. However, the study did point out that there was no real way to measure people's trust in science before the article was given to them. And so that is a shortcoming of this study. The last limitation that we felt was significant was that this study may have actually reinforced the belief in pseudoscience amongst participants. During the final phase of the study, the participants were told the true reason for measuring their dissemination and beliefs in pseudoscience, as well as all the contents in the survey. And because of this, the participants might have felt that they would be more inclined to believe any scientific content so long as it is supported by scientists. For future studies, the first thing that should be done is that this study should be replicated to people outside of the Amazon and Dynata databases to increase the generalizability of this study. We suggest that this study could be replicated with school-age children aged, for example, ages 5 to 18 in public schools, and whether their beliefs are influenced by the census regions they're in, their families' beliefs, the age groups, so middle school, high school, stuff like that, as well as the socioeconomic status of each group. And although this would not be generalizable to adults like this study had intended, this would help increase the generalizability and to make sure the sample was more representative of the US population than the researchers intended. Overall, O'Brien et al. Did accomplish what they were trying to do, which was demonstrate a correlation between pseudoscientific information and vulnerability to misinformation. However, we believe that their experiments must be further replicated either identically or to our suggestions to limit these limitations as much as possible. Thank you.